Hi, I'm Sarah Horrocks from the Connected Learning Centre, and in this recorded session, I'm going to be working with my colleagues Peter Lillington and Rowan Roberts, and we're going to be making some suggestions around feedback and assessment. We're going to be drawing on the community of practice of teachers that we work with, drawing on some really great examples from other teachers. And I'm going to start off the session by talking about a story that a teacher told to me recently, highlighting some of the challenges of ongoing feedback in a remote context. And one of the things that she was saying is how difficult it's been with the asynchronous teaching to get that kind of to and fro around feedback. So she said that what had been happening is that they'd been setting assignments. That was working really well. There actually had been really good engagement, even though it's a school with high disadvantage, and they've had to actually provide laptops for children. But so children are doing the work. But what was tending to happen is that a child might give in all their assignments, perhaps on a Friday, and then what was happening is that actually, say for example in maths, the child's misconception had meant that every single piece of work that they'd done around that maths was incorrect, because there hadn't been that kind of adjustment that Dylan William describes as being a bit like a pilot, flying and doing that constant checking of, what's the climate like, and how is the plane responding, so that we do so naturally in the classroom that we almost don't have to think about it. But in an online context, you have to really, really think differently about how you're doing that checking for misconceptions and understanding and picking up on those as you go. It now becomes something that's more difficult, and even when you're doing live teaching online, it's not obvious. So we wanted to ask you a little bit about how that's going for you in your school, what you're doing in terms of the misconceptions and checking for understanding, whether in a synchronous, live or asynchronous form. Anyone sort of brave enough to get us started with just talking about how you're doing that kind of checking for understanding and misconceptions?
Should I start? I think it's really interesting. I think it varies subject to subject. And at the moment, I can probably speak for myself primarily for our upper phase, which is our Key Stage 2. And then acknowledge that actually I think it's a lot more difficult for Key Stage 1, and it varies subject to subject. So we're using assignments, we're picking up on those, and I think the option to go in before it's been turned in is quite a useful one, where you can go in and you can check. So it's a bit like that live dialogue with your student. So that's one thing. In maths, the maths program that we use, Power Maths, highlights the misconceptions that could come up in each lesson. So that's quite useful for us as teachers. And what I do particularly is I'll start off and I will ask the children, and we do teach live primarily, I'll ask the children to show me on their whiteboards. We sent them home with whiteboards, the answer to a question, so I can see straight away whether they've fallen for one of the misconceptions. So a question would be constructed in a way that would help me to identify that. And that works quite well. And based on that, I send some children off on their own and delve and work deeper with others. And the other thing that I've taken to using is posting some statements in the chat, and the children have to react to them. So they have a choice of statements, particularly say in maths, the always, sometimes, never type of statement. And again, even although for maths, we're doing a shared marking type of situation at the end of a lesson, and I have to, we have to rely and trust that they're going to let us know if they've found it tough and difficult. but I might pick out one of the questions before we go over the answers, and again do that sort of check-in in the chat. And generally they're quite, you know, it's quite interesting to see what pops up. They're quite good, I think, and quite honest in that, because they all think they've got it right. I find English I'm finding assessing English quite difficult, because I feel that I'm not quite getting the volume. You can't see the book. I suppose that's English writing. I can see that they're doing fine, but the deeper bit I'm finding difficult. So if anyone has any tips there.
And that's because they're handwriting in English, and so yeah, you're not.
Oh yes, you're peering at the screen, like, you know, turning. Yes, absolutely. So yes, I think that's generally how we're doing it.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you for that. And yeah, some really good suggestions there in things like using the whiteboards, and also I suppose just about using other resources, and maybe thinking about the kind of blended learning, and going forward, and kind of when everyone returns to school, that maybe we'll be using additional resources in a slightly different way. So it's that combination of the kind of teacher skill and judgment, and then sometimes a digital resource. Thank you.
I mean, we've used, since we had our first session with Peter, I've used Padlet quite a lot to use as a bit of an exit ticket type thing, where they type in their summary or their thoughts on questions. So I'm quite a big fan of that now. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Anyone else like to make some contributions, and maybe from a kind of an asynchronous point of view as well, because there are different challenges with the different approaches and different platforms.
We've been using Padlet as well. So I'm Key Stage 1. So yeah, we're doing some lives, but then I found the Padlet for lessons I'm doing that aren't live is quite good, as you can see all their responses as they come up live. So you can kind of comment back to what they're saying, you know, all that, or you can leave audio feedback on there. So I've been sort of, rather than, because some of mine to sit and read, if I write a couple of sentences, it's quicker if I just do a quick audio recording of, oh, that's a really good point, have you thought about this? So I quite like Padlet it's not live in the sense that it's a video and the children are all there talking, but you can see it in real time what they're writing and give feedback, and it's quite it's nice as a collaborative document, because they can feel quite they're all at home, and it's nice for them to see what each other's done as well, and so I quite like it from that point of view. So Padlet has been a real pro, I think, for us.
In that graphic that we showed earlier with our kind of 6 principles of remote learning, one of them is kind of community of inquiry. So that really kind of fits well. It's that idea that actually children are learning from each other and being able to see each other's work in a really kind of visible way. You know, it encourages a sense of sort of belonging, community, but also that sort of learning together.
Yeah, we've just started using Padlet. I'm year 5. I'm Elodie from Julian's, and I now feel like we're not brave enough. We're going to have to be braver, because all we've done is use it as a collaborative idea generation for the year 5. So we've not actually used it with us. Well, I like to sit and watch them write, actually, like you were saying, Ellie, but I now need to think, okay, I can use this more of a assessment and feedback tool rather than just a collecting of ideas. So something else to try this week, I think. So thank you for that. We're mainly asynchronous, apart from one day a week, and so that's one Zoom, small group Zoom, where we're trying to teach something. So we are struggling with you know, timely feedback, and actually finding the children who have, well, there's misconceptions, which, you know, at least they're doing the work and you can see the misconception even if you catch it a bit late. But the biggest issue, I think, is the children who only do 1 out of 4 lessons, or, you know, do them in the wrong order. And so then we, you know, the misconceptions can be many and very difficult to dig out afterwards. And that's a real problem we've got. We've got a whole line of reporting now back inside the school for the children that we think are either struggling or struggling with just simply the setup of learning, or whose parents are just simply not able to help. And of course, often they are the children who would have needed a lot more support at school. And so it's a little bit worrying. And well, we haven't found a great solution yet, unfortunately, but we're just going to keep trying to find the right way forward.
And I think what you're saying about kind of it's the recording it, and it's having that method, isn't it? So, and it also it being like a whole school responsibility, but that you're doing that kind of tracking, even if at the moment you can't necessarily find a solution for every child, but you kind of know what is going to be needed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've got people calling the parents, but we're all very conscious, aren't we? I've had parents, you know, share some of their fears, frustrations, you know, their inability to help really, and sometimes getting a bit annoyed. And we are trying to be quite careful about not having you know, if I'm calling as the teacher and then I've reported the fact the child isn't working, and then someone from SLT is going to call, and then our mentor, you know, who is also going to call, and then suddenly we've created a situation where the parent feels under even more pressure, which wasn't the idea. The idea was to support the child, me for the child, someone else for the parent. And so that comes across the wrong way. So we're trying to be, as you say, a bit more careful and sensitive. And as you said, if necessary, we'll catch it all up when we're back in school, because we are a little bit helpless, unfortunately. But
okay, any other contributions?
One thing that we have really been struggling with this lockdown has been assessment, which is why this meeting is so helpful. We've really improved our engagement this lockdown. And it just seems like the next challenge for us is how to assess and feedback. So our engagement has been helped by things like we do a morning and afternoon live registration on Hangout, which means they're completing the work more. And a very natural next step is then how to respond to that work. Because I don't know if I need to use Padlet. Thank you for that. I'm Googling Padlet as we speak and signing up. Thank you, that seems wonderful. So for example, if they're handing in something on Google Classroom, you do this elaborate comment with a challenge. And I don't know if you guys find this, but the kids is kind of like, no, I've handed it in now. You know, I'm done here. And so we're not really getting that, you know, that response marking, that responding to challenges. So one of the things we've changed is we will keep a note of, say, who did not get compact column method, and then that group has a specific small group video the next day. So it's like an ongoing process. And then so for maths, we use effective maths. And so each sort of second slide is a different challenge. And what we've done, because we're finding that you were sort of trusting that they were going through the slides with us and then handing in the independent task, but there's really no way to assess that. So instead, we've given them almost the slides to complete as they go through, which we're finding is a much more accurate representation of their understanding. Because, you know, bless them, who knows what they're using a calculator for if it's just one big task. When it's like quite simple, small, broken down tasks over 10 slides, they're much more likely to return it. They're much more likely to do their own work. And they're much more likely to just go, I don't know. So that's been really helpful for us in assessing, but we are still really struggling with how to provide and then get feedback from kids.
I think you make a really important point about the breaking things down. I think that's the thing that seems to be, you know, at whatever level, whether it's at kind of university level with online learning or working with very young children, you just have to break everything down into much, much smaller chunks, and have whatever way you can to check. That's really helpful. Thank you.
And it means that we're not getting through as many lessons as we would have normally, but at least we know this way, we've got a much better idea of who has just been completely left behind on this one subject.
Yeah. And it's like, I remember with the first lockdown, the head teacher at Rosendale was talking about their kind of principles and saying that they were not going to be teaching new concepts at that point, because I mean, obviously we're into a different situation now. We've learnt more, and we're in this situation for longer than we thought. So we are having to teach new concepts, but it is that idea that you have to have different expectations of what you're able to cover, and it's better that you kind of cover what you can and get it right than kind of zoom ahead with the coverage and not get the children's kind of understanding. Okay, anyone else like to say? Yes.
I'm Ola from Lark Hall. We're not doing any live teaching either. There's too many of our families that have got so many siblings that it's just a logistical nightmare. And a lot of them also just haven't got the quiet space to be able to do it. So we're just doing it all. We've possibly got too many things on the go at once, but we're trying to, the last week in SLT, we've been talking about assessment and what we can do, because, we'll get finding that, like you were saying, as it Lena, that kids are submitting and then that's it, they're done, and it could be kind of to an awful standard. But so our teachers at the moment, they're trying to devise Google Forms assessments, Socrative assessments, and as many assessments as possible where the kids can kind of get immediate feedback on the actual form, and we're finding that quite helpful for the kids, but also as much as possible, especially lower down the school, like early years and Key Stage 1, we're finding like video feedback. One of our teachers designed a Google form where if the child gets it wrong, the child gets automatically redirected to a video clip of him explaining the method again, which I didn't even know you could do. So when he showed me, that was amazing, blew my mind a bit. So that was really good. So you can do that on Google Forms. But we also, the writing is what we're finding really hard. So lower down the school, we're really worried about reading and the kids keeping up with all the phonic sounds. We're trying to say to parents, like, your child has missed 3 sounds this week, and they're like, So in reception, we've gone to kind of one-to-one Zoom phonic sessions for the kids that have done nothing. In year 1, we're doing, basically, we've had to go through all of our kids and kind of see who's engaging, who's not engaging, and kind of have a completely different thing set up for each child. Which is, we've got a fair amount of kids in, which is helpful, but we're finding one-to-one Zoom sessions for some kids to actually do phonics sessions is really helpful, but then others we're just finding lots of video feedback and instant feedback is really good. We found Class Dojo to be really helpful for the younger kids. They really like that, and the video and the audio feedback is really helpful. But further up the school, writing has just been really tricky, so in the end we've resorted to getting everyone to come and collect a paper pack, and we're expecting a writing sample back in, and that's the best we've come up with. So either they bring it back in, or we want a photograph of their writing. We haven't been able to see enough writing from Google Classroom, obviously, and the kids' typing isn't good enough, and we just need to see them. That's what we're worried about. They're not physically putting pen to paper enough. So we've just gone a bit old school with the writing, and we've asked them all to come and collect a pack. We've made all the videos and everything as usual, but we want a physical piece of writing back in. And that's kind of the best we've come up with. But certainly for maths and science and the topic subjects, Socrative we're finding really useful, and Google Forms we're finding really useful to see where they're at. But our biggest concerns are phonics, and that's the only thing we've been able to do is just do that one-to-one. Our teachers are phoning, so the way we've organised it is our teachers are in class half the week teaching the kids in school, and then at home at home the other half of the week responding to online learning and doing one-to-one telephone or video calls. And so it's not immediate, like the feedback. A child, like I said, might submit something on a Friday or Monday and not get feedback until later that week, but that's the best we've got at the moment, and it means they're getting individual feedback at least. So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Ola. There's so much there in what you've said. Kind of, the use of tools, and I think, as you say, the use of Socrative and forms, but also this sense of kind of differentiation and personalization has never been so important. So it's kind of just really knowing every single child and what their context is and what their understanding is, and then putting things in place. And it's incredibly resource heavy, isn't it? But it's what what we're having to do in the situation. Thank you for all those contributions. Anyone would like to contribute who hasn't yet?
So we're using Seesaw, so it's videos, and then so it's completely asynchronous, so they then submit their work. And we found that, like everyone was talking about with English, we found it particularly helpful with English because we've sent home books for them to complete their English in, and then they can take a photo of it and upload that photo onto Seesaw. And then using like the text tools, we can mark it as we would in class. So highlight the elements of the lesson they've got right, and then leave little notes. We are finding, like with everyone else, it's really good for leaving feedback, but then it does rely totally on the children responding to it, which is completely dependent on that child and yeah, how they're doing at home. Some of them are just like, oh, I'm done now, but then some actually really like engaging in that dialogue with the teacher, so they'll leave you little voice notes and then you can respond, or sometimes it just feels like you're texting an 8-year-old because you're just like messaging back and forth, which is quite a weird vibe, but it seems to work. And yeah, we found Seesaw really good as well, because you can do little videos over the activity that you've set. So we've kind of tried to embed in our kids, but if you are finding it really difficult, have a go at one, send that to us, and then we can then unpick where their misconceptions are, and you can make a little video of yourself talking over the activity to kind of model it for them, which we found really helpful. But again, that obviously does rely on them actually telling you if they're finding it difficult, or being aware of the fact that they have got that misconception in the first place, which obviously they don't always have. But yeah, I really like the idea of the Google Forms and Padlet as well. So thank you for those of you who mentioned those. I want to start incorporating those as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. And yeah, definitely kind of Seesaw, although it's well, there is the free version, but it's sometimes the investment of a school in a platform like that, where you have got that functionality kind of all built in. But all of these things we can do within the different platforms. So it's not that it's about tools and platforms. It's about teaching process, isn't it? But it's finding the solutions. And it's just that thing that feels to me like everything has to be much more explicit in the online teaching. So all of those things that you just do naturally, but you're having to find a kind of a technical solution for, but maybe somehow it'll make our teaching even better, because we are having to be so explicit about what we're doing and what that process is.
Something that I think is quite interesting about the way that things are at the moment is basically that like every bit of communication that is happening between teachers and pupils is kind of being seen a lot more as like teacher-pupil dialogue or feedback or assessment. And of course, like that was true before. Like it's always been true that communicating with students is part of how you do formative assessment, like constantly. But now, because it's almost like, because we have to make the technical solution, we are just thinking about it in a different way and putting it under that lens and calling it what it is, which I think is really interesting, and hopefully something that we can kind of bring forward even when we're not in these particular circumstances.
Can I, if I may, add something about because when you were talking about this difficulty in English of revisiting feedback, which I have found, I have my little signals to the kids about, go back and add this or think about that. And as you say, they just do it. But unwittingly in our group, we found a solution, I think, because we've been writing biographies with our year fives. And normally in school, you probably would have spent maybe 2 weeks on biographies. But because this is the last week before half term, we didn't want to start something new. So we extended the biography writing over 3 weeks. So they did a first set where we modeled it and did it together. The second week was they wrote their own. And of course, that's where you'd give the feedback and have maybe a slot at school for them to review. But now we've got a third week where we've got a new a new person to write about, and we can definitely build on the biography from last week with some really specific either GD objectives, which I'm doing today, or really supporting the writers who struggled in the middle week. And so that may be a solution. We need to, I think, as you were saying, we need to add extra teaching on the same subject for a bit longer, perhaps, to give them a chance to revisit those skills.
So again, it's that thing about we've been so driven by coverage rather than sometimes just by the learning. And it's that thing that I think maybe do you remember, some of you might remember kind of quite a few years ago, we did a study around blogging and writing and comparing writing in books and writing on blogs, and there were 4 schools that took part in that. But one of the things with that is that we talked about kind of like children, that often there was too much short burst writing and not enough kind of length of time on writing. So whether that was, pen and paper, or whether that was typing on the blog, but actually giving children more time to write, more time to go in depth, more time to get engaged in it. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And Elodie's just put in the chat about today you're doing a session for parents about home learning etiquette, and I think that's really important. There's, actually, again, we've always talked about kind of partnership in learning with parents, but now it needs to be really, really explicit, doesn't it? Kind of, and why it's important not to do it for the child, but how you can support them and help with some of the scaffolding. Peter, were you going to say something about the Ofsted? Yeah, I mean, just confirming everyone's on the right track so far as Ofsted goes. In their remote education research blog that they published last month, you'll see that one of the things that they highlight as part of what good teaching has always been is checking in on what pupils are learning. So I think we've covered that with some real life examples. So, but just in case you want a reference, that's where it is. And then the next couple of slides are just a disclaimer, if you like, because Sarah mentioned that we've run these sessions over the years, and in previous years we might have focused a little more on some of the platforms that schools had previously invested in, but perhaps, as you said, Sarah, there was an era of when coverage and demonstrating coverage and crunching data was perhaps more significant than now. So we're not covering these systems in any detail. It would be really interesting to know, and that's by no means a comprehensive list, but those are some systems that have been popular over the past few years and maybe still have some value. Be interesting to know whether you're even thinking about that sort of thing currently, because there are much more pressing needs. Sarah, I'm going to move on, and if anyone's got any comments on those things, please post them in the chat or let us know. And I think did mention Dylan William briefly, but I think we know that there's a lot of really good kind of theory and research out there, and I think looking at things like the EEF research around the value of metacognition and feedback being the most significant thing in teaching and learning. And then thinking about the ideas of Dylan William, and as I mentioned earlier, that idea of kind of constant monitoring, and we do think a lot about the different aspects of assessment. So the difference between that, the kind of the moderation and the tracking and the feedback and the metacognition. So I suppose it's just a quick sort of reference to, we know that there's a vast kind of theoretical base behind this, which we're not going to go into in any detail whatsoever, but just kind of wanted to to make reference to that. So yeah, Peter.
I think what we've got now is we've got some of your examples that you kindly sent in, which we really appreciate. So we split them into a couple of groups. So one group before our short break and one afterwards. So so Lauren, we've got 3 slides from you in a moment. If you're happy just to speak to those, if you like. We've added on your notes as well, and then Ellie, yours are after that, and then Elodie next in the sequence. Okay, over to you, Lauren.
Yeah, so like I said, we use Seesaw, which we found really helpful. So I've just included 3 different examples of kind of children getting the work to various degrees. So this is a piece of English work where the child has kind of met all of the success criteria, and they've worked really hard because they're quite a low ability child. So I can see they've tried really hard, / they've had a lot of parental support, going back to what was said before. But we kind of also, we've become very aware of how demotivated a lot of our kids can become. So a lot of our comments are kind of more personal, I guess, and based on them. So feeding back on their resilience or how much they've tried, and just being super enthusiastic. So that was an example of this. And on Seesaw, it's really nice because you can highlight where they've kind of met some success criteria and be super enthusiastic. This is an example of some maths work where the child has mostly got it but has made a few errors within it. So on Seesaw, you can send the work back to them. So I've kind of marked it and then left a voice note just giving a brief explanation on what they need to look at and where they can go back. And then because you sent it back, they can then go in and edit it again. And then what this child did was just redo a couple of the questions. And that works quite nicely. And it's really good. Going back, I can't remember who said it, but being able, even though I teach in year 5, often being able to do a voice note rather than written feedback is really, really helpful, because that is how, if we were in the classroom, that is how you'd be dipping in and helping them. And verbal feedback, I think, is the most effective form of feedback. So having that function all through the year groups, I know that all of our teachers all the way up to year 6 have found super, super helpful. And that's been really, really beneficial. And then this one is just an example of where some of the kids just have not got it at all. And they've just sent me a message saying, I have no idea what's going on, Lauren, which is completely fair enough. And I quite rated that they felt confident enough to do that. So then, like I said before, I was able to go into the worksheet that they were being expected to complete and kind of model how to do it using a video tool. So it sounds a bit like what someone referred to earlier on the Google form, so taking them back to an explanation of how to go through the method. So this is really, really helpful for those children who might otherwise get a bit left behind, because it gives them an opportunity to flag what they're confused about, and then for you to model really clearly how to complete that task and go through those questions. And we found the video method, because you would kind of show them again in class, you'd be going through it with them, you'd be using manipulatives, and so this is kind of a good middle ground for that, I guess. But I think the main thing from all of it is trying where possible to build that interaction and to have the verbal element of feedback, which we found fantastic.
Great, thank you very much. And Ellie, over to you.
So we're using Teams. I haven't quite worked out yet how to do the verbal feedback, but that sounds really useful, because I think especially for some of my younger ones, they're year 2, but a lot of them, they would need that voice. So this is one of my more able children, so she would respond really well to that written comment. She would just take that in, and so they have a morning assignment where they have their tasks set, and then I will feedback at the end of the morning, writing comments onto the feedback box on Teams, and then I return it to the child. So I'd say, you know, check this question, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of, and then they have their afternoon tasks and the same again. But like you say, I'm really trying to highlight things they've done well, as well, because I think, like you were saying, that kind of, they could get demotivated, especially with the lack of contact with their peers and with me. So I really am trying to encourage them to keep going, especially as we're now kind of coming to week 6. I'm feeling it, so they must be feeling it as well. So they have their maths and their English in the morning, and I'll write more detailed comments for the maths and the English and their phonics tasks that they are set. And then if there is something I feel that a lot of them have a misconception on, or I will do a little video. So I've got, you know, where you film from above, and I use the manipulatives, because I find that for I mean, I think manipulatives need to be used across the school, but especially for mine, they really need that visual, concrete maths. Or I will go through it. So we have 3 10-minute check-ins a day, as well as a couple of live lessons a week. So it might be something I pick up in that live session and get that immediate feedback. Or if I've noticed in the morning, quite a few of them have struggled on the same question, I'll then go through it at our lunchtime check-in, and I'll just say, just from this morning, we did this, let's go over this one again. So that's trying to get that more immediate feedback and that back and forth as well. I've really, apart from those live sessions, it can be quite difficult, because I can say that and write my comment, check this one and send it back. But often I won't then get the checks back. So I don't see how that's kind of happened, and we're still working out how to do that on Teams. I really like that you can draw straight onto it on Seesaw. I mean, sometimes they'll submit pictures. So I usually will give them the option of completing it online, because some of ours don't have printers, or they will have a PDF, and they can do it straight into, we send them home with books, so they could do it in the books, take a picture of that and submit it. So I'm trying to give them a range of ways to access it, which obviously affects the feedback as well. But here she's done it straight onto an editable document. So that's kind of where we are, but I'm still looking for ways to finesse and get that more immediate feedback, so you can get those misconceptions addressed straight away. But that's how we've been doing it on Teams.
Elodie, we've got several examples from you, and some from Billy as well. I don't know if you're able to comment on those, but
sure. Yeah, I mean, this one will be quick. So so we don't use Seesaw, which I'm a little bit envious, actually, because it looks like such a fantastic software and platform. And the whole school is on J2E, which is something we started using for homework anyway. I mean, before lockdown. And then, of course, that was the, I guess, obvious continuation is to move all the learning on there. And it's taken us some time to learn how to use it better, and same with the children and the parents. We still get some frustrated parents, you know, about the sharing of documents and things like that, but we are all getting much better at using it for assessment and feedback. So just like Seesaw, you can leave a voice message. You can leave a voice message on a folder, which I do at the end of every week on Fridays, kind of like a roundup of the week. I really liked how you did this, you know, like a motivating speech, as some of you were saying. I give out my dojo points as well. I praise, but you can also comment on an individual piece of work. And then, yes, this is, so obviously in school, we give out raffle tickets. Well, we have several rewarding systems at school, but one of them is a raffle tickets for really outstanding, you know, kindness or just going above and beyond. So as a year group, we decided to reintroduce it from home. So I'm using this kind of randomizer. And as one of you mentioned, engagement. And of course, that was an issue in the first couple of weeks of lockdown. So the raffle helps, because they have to upload work every day, and that has had an impact incredibly. So I'm really pleased about that. This is more specific marking on English. So the ticks, which I will use in my marking at school, or the star, which tend to be either you know, doing something that is above and beyond, I guess, on their piece of work. And then the arrow is their target. But as we've said, I think only, I mean, not even a handful of children really go back in their work. Most of them are not interested in doing so. So we're trying to find solutions to do that. And then, yes, sometimes pick, just to vary a little bit between the voice and the ticks and the stars and the arrows, I sometimes upload pictures which speak 1,000 words, I feel sometimes. So I have an Oscar one as well for any drama that they do, which hopefully makes them feel good. And on J2E, we have a messaging where we have a chat function, which it's up to the teacher whether they let the class use it. I very quickly decided I wanted to let my class use it. I had to do a little bit of safeguarding, internet safety, you know, speech, talk about behavior online. But they love it, and it allows me as well to communicate every day with them in a different way. This is a bit more, you know, this is a bit more casual, I guess, and just, you know, to send messages. So for example, yesterday, reminding them about the BBC internet safety, and they're very creative. You can see up there, this girl, she's found a new font. So she was teaching everyone how to use new fonts on the chat. And I just think that's just wonderful, actually. And there's my Padlet, which now pales into comparison, I think, to what some of the stuff that some of you are doing. But this was a follow-up on RE after teaching RE, so a kind of assessment, which is ask questions to an imam about going on the Hajj. And then as a second rate of assessment, we wanted them to rate their friends' questions. So not only ask their own, but also have a look at all the questions and say, which questions do you think are the best, to really get some information. So hopefully they're also evaluating their friends' questions as well.
Yeah, Lydia, and I'm just going to show Billy's examples from for your same school. If you want to say anything, do, but I think we've got some notes on as well. So J2E again, yeah.
So that's on J2E. I mean, mine sometimes handwrite, which is very messy, but this is much neater. Oh yeah, we haven't used quizzes in year 5. Billy's in year 6. So that's my next target actually in the team, is to encourage everyone to do quizzes, which we're going to do on Friday in science. So. Oh yeah, so I do have a question actually, but I could ask Billy, this is presumably a Google questionnaire. Do they need their own login to answer, you know, this quiz? Or because if they do, then I'll have to do it on Kahoot. I guess that's Peter, do you know, would they need their own Google login to answer a Google form quiz?
I think there's various, it depends.
Yeah,
Okay.
not necessarily. You can decide in the settings, so you can have one that can be responded to by anyone and that they don't need to log in. Obviously, if you do that, then you might want to have a name field. Yeah, but so you know whose it is. But yeah, no, I would do a test, because it's something where it's very easy to accidentally get the settings wrong, and I'm saying that because I have done that many times. So yeah, like just make sure that you have a little bit of time. Sometimes you have to like go into the settings and make sure that it can be responded to by anyone, but it should be fine.
Yeah, my biggest regret actually with my year 5s and the whole team, because I'm computing lead at school as well, is not to have gotten them up and running, both the staff, the team, my teacher peers, and the children on Google, because we were starting to set up Google Classroom and we just missed it, you know, so I feel a bit, anyway, onwards and upwards next time.
So thank you so much, everyone. Ola, we've got yours after our break. We've been going for an hour now, so we wanted to give you a few moments, just have some time away from the screen, but a tool that we've been starting to explore. It's great to hear how popular Seesaw and Padlet are, but we've been looking at Mentometer. So just as a task for you to engage with, if you like, over the break time, we're going to invite you to submit any thoughts or comments or issues that we haven't covered so far. So I'm sure some of you have used Mentometer before. If you go to menti.com, and is the code visible there? I've got something in the way. Yeah, if you go to menti.com and use that code 792386, this is a word cloud format. You can submit as many words as you want. So I did a sample before. I put in evidence, moderation, reporting, but we're much more interested in anything that you might submit. And there's also a comment function, which maybe we'll use after the break. So I don't know if everyone's back, but thank you very much for adding things to the Menti, which hopefully you can see my screen now, and it's great to see those things coming in live. I think this is the first time we've used the word cloud in a session like this. So I'm going to give it one more minute and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But if you see down at the bottom right-hand corner, there is a little comment function, and we haven't tried this out live, so let's have a go. I think the comments only appear on the presenter's screen, but if you'd like to add your thoughts using the comment function, I think we'll see those flash up on the screen in a moment, very briefly. They're not captured, so they're kind of live reactions. As with all of these tools, it's great to try it out a few times. One of the settings is allow multiple postings. So if you want to refresh your screen or go back to it using the code, I think you'll be able to again. I can see we've got some more thoughts coming on. So great. Great try of this app. Fantastic. Thank you. I can see we've got 10 submissions have happened. So in terms of tracking who's doing things, useful discussions. Great. I'm going to stop sharing now and change slides.
Thank you, Peter. So I think what's really interesting is the results from the Mentometer compared to this slide that I prepared earlier. And when I say I prepared earlier, but actually, like I was saying at the beginning, because we've run this this session every year for many years, it's a slide that I've kind of repeated the use of each year. But I think it does show how thinking or emphasis has changed, because I think a few years ago we were all obsessed about marking policy and tracking, and I think now we're much more focused on the words that you had in the Mentometer, which is much more about that constant dialogue with learners to help move them forward. This is another slide that we felt stood the test of time, but actually is based on the work of somebody who's been writing about this for many years. This is from the work of somebody called Helen Barrett, and you can see that this is over 10 years old, but this is some of the work that she was doing a long time ago around kind of e-portfolios. But I think it's still helpful for us to think about, and now that we are in this kind of era of remote learning and blended learning, just thinking about the different functions of the tools that we're using. So, you know, thinking about when we're using a platform or a tool as the workspace, so it's the place where children are actually doing their work, where we're using it as the reflection space for us to be reflecting and feeding back to them and having dialogue with them, and where they are also reflecting. And we've talked this morning about how that's often the difficult bit, is to actually encourage children to go back to previous work and to think about it. But it also can be the showcase. So, and, you know, children's work has never been more public, kind of to themselves and to their families. So it can be a showcase, but it also can support what we were talking about earlier in terms of that community of inquiry and the kind of cross-fertilization and cross-learning that happens between children, because each other's learning is more visible in the digital space. And then the idea that also it can be a digital repository. So if we're talking about something like Google Classroom, it can be the digital repository of work that we've done, and we can go back and look at that work in the future. And like I was saying earlier, that it's the digital trace of the work that we've been doing. So I just think it's interesting to kind of notice those differences over the years, not just to do with the fact that we're now kind of in this online environment, but that we're less obsessed by things like marking policy and writing comments that were sort of for another adult to look at, rather than something that's going to be useful to the child. And I think the examples that you were showing before the break are just fantastic, and the way that you're using voice notes, and you're using chat function, and you're using commenting to actually have that conversation with children about their learning.
Sarah, I know this is another component that we've regularly had, and my comment in the cloud at the top is just based on Googling. If you Google for assessment genre, you'll get, you know, what are the 3 assessment genre, or 4 or 5 or 7 or 10. So we're not pursuing that now, but as we've been talking about and you've been demonstrating, it's that quality of teaching. So things have moved on, but just as a kind of refresher for you, here's some of the sorts of assessment, and we've got a link there to schematic overview from the Future Learn course.
Yeah, great.
So this is an assessment planner from a Future Learn course, and it goes into a whole lot of detail about what's the purpose of your assessment, and so for wider.
And I think, you know, we're having such interesting conversations at the moment in education around, you know, what's going to happen in terms of testing and examinations. Yesterday, Peter and I were on a meeting with some European colleagues as part of our Co-Make project, which is about computational thinking and very young children. But we were just sharing amongst the educators there that, you know, which countries had scrapped their exams for this year, how they were moving more to teacher assessment, and very different kind of approaches across the countries, which were Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands. But we're globally, we're having this whole conversation about what's the function of the summative assessment. Today, mostly we're talking about that formative assessment, that kind of ongoing assessment. But I don't know whether anyone wants to reflect at the moment on kind of where they feel the relevance of the summative, which isn't, of course, just the national kind of tests. It's also what you pass over to the teacher, perhaps, that's going to take over from the next year, or where you look across a school and look at progress across year groups. So it's not saying that summative is not useful, but there might be the kind of the useful school-based summative assessment, and then there's the kind of national testing context.
Well, they're talking in the news a lot at the moment about what to do about all the catch-up, aren't they? So there's all the chat about, should we have a longer school day? Should we work through the summer holiday? Should we get tutors and everything? But it's a bit scary reading about all that, because it kind of seems to be very much for the summative agenda and the league tables and that kind of thing, as opposed to anything useful for the kids. So yeah, that's quite relevant, I think.
Yeah, it's getting to the heart of what's the learning that hasn't happened, that needs to happen, and how do we do that best, rather than, again, being driven by the kind of accountability systems.
Yeah, and it feels a bit worrying that we're not part of that conversation, because surely, they should be asking us first, do we think the kids are behind? What do we think they should know? I mean, it feels like a really good opportunity for really rethinking what we need, these little, 10-year-olds to know, or 15-year-olds to know. But is anyone going to be brave enough to have that conversation? I don't know.
And actually what you've all described this morning is some really, really sophisticated methods for doing that within your schools. So the fact that you're really, really drilling down to each child and their family context, and what they've been able to learn and cover, and their kind of the concepts that they've grasped or not, and what you're going to have to do. So you're really doing that at a very deep level. That's the thing that's important, that you're doing that in your classrooms, and then you're talking with your colleagues and your school leadership about what needs to happen in a really differentiated, personalised way for every single child in your school. That for me is what assessment is really about.
It's interesting because we have an online, we subscribe to GL, so we do online. We've just started doing online testing this year, and we gave the children we set the children the online progress test in reading in, I think, the second week back, and there was a bit of debate about it. And what came up was the argument that actually, if we set it, we also, obviously we don't want the children to be stressed by it, but we will have a measure of where they are now in this situation. And I think that being able to explain that is also about having that professional knowledge about where your children are. Well, that result is unexpected, or I would expect that to be higher. And I think that, in other jobs that I've had, apart from, outside of teaching, that when you have a reporting structure, you report at that time, and you need to be able to have a narrative to go with it. So I don't agree with putting the children through undue stress, but it's good that we have, we will track, we will report, and maybe it's because we're an independent school and we have, if you like, stakeholders, but equally having the having something that we can use as a little bit of a measure has some uses.
So it's kind of, so it's what you need to know, and what's going to be helpful to you as a teacher, but it's also making sure that you're doing the best by the children in your school.
Yeah.
Also in comparison to national expectations.
Yes, well, yes, and also, for themselves. They're benchmarking throughout the year. So, but yeah, it's a strange one. I mean, we are, you know, we debate whether or not we should be doing the SATs anyway, and we're not allowed to do that. We weren't allowed to do some of the tests that were initially going to go forward anyway. So it's, you know, it's a strange situation.
We're all learning so much through this crisis that we are reevaluating all the bits that are helpful.
Yes, and unhelpful. Yes.
So I think we've got another example now. Ola is going to talk to us.
Yeah, so the screenshots are a bit blurry, my apologies, but it's just, yeah, a summary of all the different things we're using that I mentioned before. So we use Google Classroom for Key Stage 2. So here's how we're kind of getting writing samples, and you can see the teacher is giving some kind of written comments. There's a bit of back and forth there, but we found that that's only really possible with the more able children who have got that kind of quiet space and parental support. So it's really hit and miss. But as I was going through Google Classroom across the school, I did find that there wasn't much feedback being given on Google Classroom, and it is, I guess, our main form of feedback is the phone calls that happen at least once a week, but for those that need it, twice a week. The maths, we use White Rose Maths, where children can kind of write on their devices directly onto the worksheet, and then teachers can mark. So we are finding maths is much easier to give feedback to, obviously, because so many of the answers are just kind of right or wrong. And there's example, again, the teachers giving some written feedback there and giving some instruction. But it's, yeah, the Google Forms and the Socrative, which I think are coming next. Yeah, so here's a Socrative one that one of the Year 5 teachers is using for their history learning, and so that gives the instant feedback, which we find quite helpful. Obviously not used for core subject assessment, but it does give the children some instant feedback and give the teachers kind of a gauge of where they're at with their learning and how well they've been following on the learning. Yeah, we did start to use Seesaw last year, which Rowan was helping us with, but I'm really jealous people are still using it, but we found that loads of our devices in school were just too old to be able to keep up with using Seesaw. So we've got a big kind of, we haven't invested in new tech for too long now, so we need to do a big reinvestment if we can find the money somehow. But yeah, so we're back onto forms and yeah, using Socrative. So here's a Google Forms, and this is the form where the teachers put in the White Rose questions. And this is the teacher who's also then created the links to, if the answer is wrong, they go to an explanation video. So I have emailed him to ask him how you do that, and I'll pass it on if I hear back from him. But yeah, we really like the White Rose Maths and how kind of visual it is for the children and how the children can kind of work on it straight away. And the Google Forms are really good. Yeah, there's another Socrative here for history and geography. Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. And then what the Google form, I think there's something there that's from the Socrative quiz. So that's how the results get shown to the teacher. So you've got the percentage column in column C, and then you can actually see all the children's responses. So you can kind of analyze how they're getting on with that, which is quite helpful as a range, yeah. And then and the lower down the school, we use Google Class Dojo. So you can see that the teachers are giving some video feedback to each of the children. The fact that children can send videos of their own learning is really helpful for the younger ones where they're not able to kind of write so much, but we do want to see how they're doing. So it doubles up as kind of a well-being check and it's some interaction. So yeah, we like Dojo for that, and you can give all the points as well. And then this is one of our 2-year-olds actually who's sharing her home learning. She's very sweet, and that's the example I've written back to her and given them some video links. And yeah, it's one of our reception kids practicing letters. So it's a nice range of learning we're getting back from the kids, from audio and video and instant on the forms. But yeah, the main form of feedback that we're finding is the most helpful is the one-to-one calls, either via Zoom or on the phone each day, really. That's the only way we've kind of figured out how to get that immediate feedback and that relevant feedback to each child. Yeah.
And can I just ask how you're managing that? I mean, that sounds very beneficial, but very time consuming. I mean, do you have like people, you were talking about kind of how you're distributing kind of roles and responsibilities?
So of the teachers in each year group, they have half the week teaching in class, half the week dedicated to home learning. So over each week, they have 2.5 days in class, 2.5 days dedicated to phone calls and feedback. At the moment, that is fine. And then kind of each of the senior leadership team, So I oversee early years, then we support and kind of cover extra if we need to, or chase up those families that aren't engaging. But we're finding that half the week is enough to keep on top of the home learning and the phone calls, apart from for those like the most difficult families to reach, which we're all kind of struggling with to get hold of and keep engaged. But for the most part, yeah, the split over each week is working out pretty well. Well, as best as it can be, I guess.
Thank you very much. That was marvellous to have all those examples from everyone. Rowan, I know that you've got some more Padlet material ready, so if I share screen again.
Yeah. So really just, we thought it might be useful, and then a few people had mentioned that they were using Padlet and wanting to do a little bit more with it. So we thought it might be handy to just go through some of the different, basically these are the different Padlet formats that you can have. So when you make a board in Padlet, if you haven't used it before, it's essentially kind of like an online notice board where you can add different posts and they contain different types of content. You can also switch on comments so that the children or whoever is looking at the Padlet can respond to the individual posts. And there are a few ways of using it. And this is the kind of what you have to choose when you make a new board. And all I've done really is just kind of like make a few mock-ups of examples of what these formats might actually look like, just so you can have a think about how they might be useful. So the first one is the wall, which we'll see here. So a wall one is basically just, it kind of packs all of the posts into, it kind of like tessellates them together. So it will arrange them not in any particular order in terms of the content, just in an order that sort of fits them nicely together. And you can see in this example, there are a few examples of different types of content. So the first one is when you add a post, you can choose link, and then you can just paste a URL into a box. And so that's a Wikipedia link, and you can see it automatically generates like a little preview picture. It will either take a little preview of the web page, or it might take a photo from that page, just so that you can see something, which is quite nice because it just makes it quite visual and easy to see. Obviously, compared with just having a long URL in a box, it's a lot more kind of like user-friendly and appealing. The second one is also a link, but this time it's a video link. So just a link to a YouTube video, and it will kind of give you again a little preview, and you can actually play the video within the Padlet page. You don't have to navigate away from it. And then the last one, I think, is just a picture. So you can see, I mean, these are all just examples of it. So it might be you've got like a topic and you want to pull together some resources that the children use for research. This might be quite a nice way of doing that, because it's basically just presenting a few different types of information on one page, and it's very simple. Where this gets a bit complicated is if the children are also contributing. So if you, for example, had a Padlet that was designed to collect the children's work, maybe the children have all taken a photo of something that they've written in their books and they're going to post them to a Padlet page. For that, this type of format can actually get a little bit confusing, because all the posts get kind of just will go wherever they can fit, and if the child hasn't put their name on them in a very clear way, it might be a bit difficult to tell whose work is whose, and it all moves around. It can get a little bit busy and a little bit confusing, so that's why it's useful to know about some of the other formats. So the next one is, this one's called a canvas, and for this one, instead of the posts automatically getting sort of packed together, you can decide exactly whereabouts they go, and you can also connect them together. So you can see that I've added these little arrows, because this is obviously supposed to be like a life cycle, but you can represent all sorts of different types of information. You can do things like mind mapping, a little bit like the Mentometer thing that we looked at before, so representing kind of ideas and information visually and showing the relationships between different things works really well on this kind of canvas form. Once again, though, it can get quite busy if lots of people are adding posts. So if you are going to have the children contribute to a board like this, it might be better to do that using the comments, because then their comments will appear underneath the specific post that they are commenting on, instead of just all over the place. This one is a stream format. I've not really used this very much myself, I have to admit, but I think the reason that it's useful is it basically arranges the posts sort of in a vertical column, and it will put the newest post at the top. So I was thinking, what might that be useful for? And actually, when I was making this example, it was during the RSPB Big Garden Bird Watch, which I took part in. I don't know if any of you or any of your pupils did, but I thought that this could be quite a nice way of doing something like that, because the posts will appear in the order that they were posted, kind of in real time. So you might have the children completing an activity simultaneously, and they'd be able to kind of like keep an eye on the progress. So maybe they're watching birds, or maybe they're doing some sort of data collection, maybe they're, you know, looking at something out of their window. It could be a way of doing something like that. And one of the things that's kind of useful, I suppose, about the stream format is because the posts appear vertically. If you have children that are accessing a Padlet board on a smaller device, like on a phone or maybe on a tablet, it's a little bit easier to see. You just scroll up and down, and that's how you'd see everything. With some of the other formats, they get quite wide, and you have to kind of move in different directions, and it can make it hard to see things. So it kind of has its pros and cons, but it's an interesting one, and I have to admit, not one that I've used much before. This one is it's really similar to the wall one. Basically, it's called a grid. The only real difference is, as far as I can tell, the only real difference is that instead of the posts being all packed together tightly, they're arranged just in rows. So maybe that it's just, again, it's a way that you might present things. And in this example, it's like a class art gallery. Maybe you want to sort of show off all of the children's piece of work, but you don't want any one of the pieces of work to be more like prominent than the others. So you just might arrange them like that. So it's quite simple, but a useful one to know about. This one is one that we use quite a lot at the CLC. This is the shelf format, and again, I think this can be quite useful if you are gathering input, if you're not just if it's a sort of two-way Padlet, rather than you just giving information to the children. If they're contributing, the shelf can be quite useful because it allows you to create these columns and then organize the posts by what their theme is, or in whatever way you want to, really. So it's quite a nice way of, if you have quite a lot of content to put onto a Padlet page, it's quite a good way of kind of helping you to organize it and make it a little bit more comprehensible. Because yeah, once you get past about 20 posts on a Padlet board, it can be quite hard to find everything. So this can be one way of doing that. And in this case, you can see that they're organized by, like, this was a board that was about using different types of tools for different tasks, like different technological tools for different things. So we've organized them by art, animation, and so on. But it might be that you might have an activity where the children are able to make a choice about, maybe they're going to write a story, and they could write it in several different types of genre. You could ask them to submit their responses in a column that corresponds to the genre that they chose, just as an example, but obviously lots of different things that you could do with it. This is called the back channel, and this is an interesting one because it's designed much more to sort of evoke kind of social media. It's a little bit like the stream in the sense that the posts will be in chronological order and they'll be arranged vertically. But in this one, the new posts go at the bottom, and it's just designed to look a lot more like a conversation. So you can see in this one, this was like, maybe you might use it to talk about what you've done over the weekend or something like that. I've also, in this one, enabled the likes function. And so I guess in terms of thinking about kind of like dialogue and feedback and different ways of kind of communicating between teacher and pupil, this is a really, really simple, really little thing, but something that can be quite helpful. Is in Padlet, there are a few ways that children can put their it calls it responses, I think, to different posts. So they can do like they can give it a little star rating, they can click a little heart to like it. You can even have a score, so you can give it like a score out of 100, which is an interesting one because it's like, it's not just the teacher that does that, it's anyone that views it, which I don't know, you have to think about how you might use that, but it's a useful thing to be aware of. So having that kind of reactions or responses function can be quite helpful as well. This is the timeline one. I have to say, this is one that I didn't use at all for ages. And then when I did use it, I realized how useful it is, because it allows you to, I guess it allows you to show kind of like a linear progression. And that might be quite helpful if you have planned a sequence of activities and you want the children to complete them in a particular order. Obviously having a timeline is quite a useful way of showing them what that order is. So this example is how you might make an animation in Scratch, and so you start on the left hand side and you work your way along. So we sometimes do that using the shelf one that I mentioned before, because you can have more than one thing in each column, but you can use the columns in a similar way to a timeline. But I just think that the timeline is quite a nice way of representing it, and it's an interesting thing to be aware of. And in this one, I've also added the final post that you can see, which says exit ticket. I just put that there because I wanted to show you this quite neat little function of Padlet, which you'll see again if you go to the next slide. So that's actually a link to a Google form. And on Padlet, if you link to a Google form, it will embed that form on the board. So you don't have to like navigate away to go to a different page. I just thought that was quite neat and quite helpful. And anyone who is using Padlet and Google Forms, or, you know, wants that kind of like functionality, might want to be aware of that. Another thing that you can do with Padlet, and if you're using Google Classroom, there's an option when you share a Padlet board to share it to your Google Classroom. Although actually all that really does is makes a assignment in just the same way that you can from your Google Classroom, and then just links the Padlet to it. So it's not really doing anything that exciting. You could do exactly the same thing just by just manually, and you can do the same thing in Teams. If you're using Teams, just link to a Padlet board. It's as simple as that. But it's just a handy thing to be aware of. And obviously lots of these tools are developing these different ways of kind of neatly fitting together. And sometimes it's worth being aware that they're not actually done anything that exceptional or that innovative. They've just saved you a couple of clicks is really all that they've done. But we just thought we'd add that in case it was helpful. So I hope that was a little whistle-stop tour of some things that you can do with Padlet.
So just building on what Rowan just said about the details and so on and features, that's as you've been saying throughout all of you, it's getting to grips with what's possible and trying things out as well. And during this period, the main platforms have had very frequent updates and new features coming in. So just to mention, if you're using Google and Classroom and Chrome, there's a number of neat tools that you could decide to try out, and a couple that have been receiving prominence recently are Kaizen and Mote. Sarah, I know you've been trying out Mote. Did you want to say anything?
I really like it. You can, so in the comment function in Google, so whether you're commenting on you know, slides or sheets or docs, you can do a voice note. So it just again, it's kind of, it reduces the number of steps. So you can, effectively, I suppose in some ways it can make Google tools kind of a little bit more like this kind of Seesaw functionality.
Thanks. And we know some schools are using Microsoft platforms, and so again, there are other tools and all sorts of things possible with OneNote. And I mentioned Apple because I know quite recently if there have been updates to the big range of accessibility tools. So again, if any families are using iPads or they're in use in school, it's worth getting up to date, thinking about SEN pupils and so on, all the different accessibility functions that are now possible on that platform.
And can I just you've got Flipgrid there as well, Peter. That's if you haven't used that before, that's really nice for doing kind of video feedback. I mean, you have to just, you know, always have that kind of bandwidth, you know, consideration. But I think probably particularly kind of upper key stage 2, seen it used really quite nicely in secondary. But you know, you can set a kind of discussion topic or a question, and then the children send their videos back on Flipgrid.
So I guess from a strategic point of view, we're not saying you should be trying out these tools, and it's thinking, as always, about what is it that you want to achieve. And we've seen a whole range of different ways of giving feedback. So I guess that's the kind of filter that you need to put things through. We've had quite a lot of talk about Seesaw already, and Padlet, and Rowan, I know you did a session recently. Would you like to just briefly say that Scratch example that you were talking about the other day?
Yeah, I know one or two of the people here were here the last time I showed this, so I don't want to talk about it too much, but I guess if you're thinking about doing computer science type stuff in a home learning context, there are quite a few things in Scratch that can be quite useful for that. So one of them is that when you make a Scratch project, if you create a template, you can annotate the blocks in the template, so you can give little explanations. It's almost like a little sticky note that you can put next to your instruction blocks. That can be quite a helpful way of kind of supporting and scaffolding children through the process, but you can also get them to comment on their own block. So if they create a piece of work and you want them to explain what their thinking was behind the way they programmed it, you can get them to annotate, which can be quite nice. You can also comment on a piece of work that has been shared publicly in Scratch, so you can write a comment underneath. And it also has, Scratch has got like a class accounts setting where you can have a teacher that manages pupils, and if you're interested in using Scratch in this way, it's worth looking into whether that might be a good solution for using it with your class.
And we've had quite a lot of mentions of motivation and engagement. So again, many of you will be familiar with Kahoot, and that takes things to the next level in terms of leaderboards and animations and sound effects and so on. And then just on the right hand side, other examples mentioned by you earlier. Some tools do give automatic feedback depending on what an individual pupil enters in. Learning by questions is one of those in terms of maths and literacy. And we know that some schools are using Purple Mash, so lots of the things that we've talked about are possible in that platform as well. And I'm pleased we've also had mentions of using more traditional means, but perhaps over a Zoom or Google Meet or Teams call as well. So clickers we've talked about in other sessions. That's a kind of combination of QR codes, but children holding up sheets of paper with a large QR code to give responses. So that's where it's only the teacher has got a device, and all sorts of possibilities in terms of check-ins at the start of a session. How are you feeling? Do you need more help? Again, various systems of traffic light or other color codes there, and those don't necessarily need the digital medium, or can cross synchronous, asynchronous, in class, blended, and so on.
And then this idea of kind of levels of transmission. So Mark, who I mentioned earlier, who's doing our weekly, setting our weekly theme on our blended site, was talking last week about kind of levels of transmission. So when you're kind of planning online learning, you know, is it you as the teacher just kind of transmitting what's the transmission of many back to one, and what's the kind of transmission in groups? And I think we have talked about that through the session today. So kind of the community of inquiry and getting discussion and collaboration between children in different ways.
And then a kind of couple of more strategic slides for some of you who maybe got wider responsibilities, but I think all of these have come up already in some form. So I'm going to move on very swiftly and thinking about sharing successful practice with colleagues as well, different ways to do that.
So again, getting feedback and dialogue going, yeah, we'd like you to just record a few thoughts really about how you're going to take this forward in school, some of the things that you've heard about today, and yeah, kind of what you think you need to do next going back into school. So just a few reflections on the Jamboard.
I can see everyone's in the Jamboard, so feel free to type in some text or use a sticky note, whatever's convenient for you now. But if you'd like your own sheet, feel free to create one. If there's lots of feedback you'd like to give us.
If we run out of space, you can go to the next page. Yes, maybe if people could kind of keep typing whilst we just whiz through the final slide. So Peter, the Edutopia video, I think we'll send the slides out to people. So there was just some suggestions there about kind of quick checks for understanding. So kind of signaling it, picturing it, summarising it, troubleshooting it.
Yeah, this is from the DFE a while ago and related to workload as well. So as we've been discussing today, always put teaching first and the pupils' learning and not technology for its own sake. I think you all know that. Over to you, Sarah.
And then lastly, we've been really grateful to all of you who've contributed already to our blended site, but just hearing you today and hearing about the really interesting and thoughtful and imaginative ways that you are supporting the learning of the children in your schools. It would be great if we could interview you and kind of capture that for some wider sharing. So if you would like to be interviewed, I know you're very pushed for time, but we could do something very quick, just like a little 1-2 minute interview. Please do send us a message either in the chat now or email us. And just a huge thank you to all of you. Thank you for sharing all the amazing work that you're doing in schools, and yeah, just feel really impressed by you and kind of honoured to be working with you. So thank you, everybody.